Hello and welcome to episode number 24 of Performing Labor. My name is Rob Simons, and I am your host. This podcast features interviews with accomplished performing musicians who are doing interesting and creative work from within performing arts institutions and outside of them. We'll unpack their training, their practice, and their careers, how they got started, how they stay sharp, and their ambitions for the future. And it's my hope that these interviews will provide value no matter where you are on your musical journey. If you're thinking about a career in music, if you are in music school now, a working musician, or if you are a music lover and just curious to learn more. My guest this week is harpist, singer, songwriter, and Rochester, New York native, Mikaela Davis. Mikaela began studying the harp with Grace Wong, the former principal harpist of my orchestra, the Rochester Philharmonic. She attended the Crane School of Music in Potsdam, New York, where she earned a bachelor's degree in performance. And as you'll hear in the interview, her career, as it has taken shape, was far from a foregone conclusion, and a traditional academic path was another likely outcome. Mikaela ultimately, though, chose an unconventional and creative path, and became a band leader and a recording artist who tours nationally and internationally. Slant magazine remarked on her unbridled and bright vocals, and that her 2018 album, Delivery, displayed a, quote, newfound sense of artistic confidence. The hometown Rochester City newspaper said of the same record, Delivery is classic enough to evoke nostalgic feelings, but with a production that takes you to new and uncharted sonic spaces. And that review captures my own sense of Mikaela's output. Something tied to the past, playing a 19th century acoustic instrument. Some of her performances have traditional folk settings. Some have allusions to the sounds and imagery of American pop music of previous decades. But also something very forward-looking, combining and repurposing older ideas in new ways, but also creating something unique, personal, and honest. The goal of this podcast is to connect with and learn from my fellow working musicians, their experiences and their choices, and how those influence their art and their careers. But also then, by extension, there is a goal to learn about the broader music business. And for obvious reasons, this podcast has a bias towards orchestral musicians. In one way, that's a good thing, because these large institutions represent a huge part of the classical music ecosystem. But there's also a danger that institutional thinking can become hermetic. And that's why I put a premium on hearing from academics, chamber musicians, and musicians from other genres. And Mikaela's had such rich experiences in many of those areas that this conversation was a real education for me and all of the above. The writer, Virginia Postrel, wrote a book more than 20 years ago entitled The Future and Its Enemies, The Growing Conflict Over Creativity, Enterprise, and Progress. In it, she observed the collapse of traditional right-wing versus left-wing political divides. The two sides were committed to their shallow partisan identities rhetorically, but no longer had coherent and consistent values or principles. The true divide that she saw in society was between those that she called stasists versus dynamists. And in the author's telling, one can be a leftist and progressive statist, and one could be a reactionary and conservative statist. But at the end of the day, they both fear an adventurous and decentralized future, and seek to control and shape it from the top down, rather than having it flourish and unfold in dynamic and unpredictable ways. And the reason why I was reminded of that book as I reflected on this conversation is that progressives or conservatives are attributed forward or backward-looking gazes, respectively. But institutionalists and independent artists are too carelessly lumped into similar categories. There is no rule that says that an institutionalist can't also be a reformer. Institutionalists are certainly tied to the mission and purpose of their organization, but that isn't necessarily the enemy of renewal. And certainly, there are songwriters and creative artists who release work that is essentially written by committee and that chases the lowest hanging commercial fruit, and who make little artistic evolution, releasing the same book or the same record over and over again. Mikaela, though, is a dynamist. She relocated again fairly recently to be a part of a different musical scene that's a better fit. She describes her own formative institutional immersion that ultimately aided her down an unconventional path. She's grounded in her instrument's classical technique, but also counts the harp's jazz trailblazers as her heroes. And her current artistic renewal comes from both the continued exploration of older forms and past masters, but also in a business reappraisal of her own relationship with record labels that has the potential to be a great artistic and creative reset. And that last part resonated with me the most, because it seems that no matter what part of the performing arts industry one's in, there will be a susceptibility to cling to what we know, even if it's top-down control that provides short-term stability at the expense of longer-term growth, artistic freedom, and commercial flexibility. And if something good does come to the performing arts through this health crisis, it will be with more empowered and collaborative musicians unburdened, or at least less burdened, from coercive forces and entrenched attitudes about how musicians and the music business are supposed to work. Please enjoy this interview with Mikaela Davis. Mikaela Davis, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the common themes that's come up in the course of these conversations I've had on this show, and of course, most of the people that I've had on are orchestral musicians or chamber musicians, but one of the things that I hear over and over again is how much of a disconnect there is between traditional music school curriculum, which of course is deeply institutionalized, and how little overlap that is with the lives of working musicians in the 21st century. All the things like part writing or orchestration or score reading or conducting, all those things that most of us haven't thought of or used since the day we got our diplomas. But I'm wondering about you as a performing artist, as a creative artist, someone who is writing original material. I'm actually wondering if that education served you pretty well.
It has served me well. Maybe if it's more subconscious than in the forefront of my mind. But I mean, for example, when I was a kid, I would transcribe songs that I really liked on piano and figure them out, which gave me a good ear, which helped me later in theory. I remember doing ear training, and part writing came very naturally for me, and sight singing. I loved doing all those things. And I think that has helped me a lot developing my ear even further when I have to learn a song to sit in with a band, or, if I'm playing with a band and they're like, hey, we're going to play this tune, see if you can just play along with us. And I think those tools have really helped me be able to keep up with whatever's thrown at me.
When you got to school, then, did you feel like maybe your ear was a little bit more developed than some of your classmates because you've been doing all that transcribing?
I do think so. Yeah. I remember the first year of theory, I felt like I didn't really have to practice or didn't have to think too hard to do my homework. Of course, it became much more intense later on, but I always loved sight singing and was sometimes really surprised when other people would struggle with it, because it was just something that came so naturally to me. I just thought, oh, everybody can do this. I don't have perfect pitch or anything like that.
But you probably had developed some control over your voice, like as an instrument by that point.
Totally. And it probably also helped in high school. I took AP theory, and our teacher gave us these exercises and told us to listen to songs on the radio and try to sing the solfege along with the radio, I guess in like movable do. But then later on, when I went to college, my harp teacher, Jessica Suki Pilalis at Crane School of Music, she had all the harpists learn fixed do, and we always had to sing along to the melodies of the pieces we were playing, because she wanted us to develop the theory, knowing the theory of all of our pieces rather than it just being muscle memory, which was something I tended to lean on a lot, is muscle memory. So sometimes when I'm in the middle of a piece and I'd screw up the pedal patterns on the harp, I would just be kind of lost and have to start over at the previous section or something. But learning fixed do on the harp really helped me understand theory and understand figuring out songs faster, I suppose.
Interesting. My great aunt was a harpist and a singer too, but like an operatic singer, and very much in the Italian style. She was actually the daughter of Italian immigrants, but I don't really remember her playing the harp and singing at the same time, although I'm sure she did. So I'm wondering actually if the integrating the harp playing and the singing in your teenage years, was that sort of a formative thing for you, going forward to the artist you've become?
Totally. I mean, I started writing songs when I was in sixth grade. I guess I was, what, 12 or 13, and that was on piano. So I guess I've been singing and playing for a long time. Singing fixed-o along to the pieces I was learning though was incredibly difficult, and I kind of hated it sometimes.
Tell me about those early creative exploits. So you said you started writing songs at a pretty young age. Did you know that that probably wasn't very common for classical musicians at that time, or was just something that you had inside you and you wanted to get out? I mean, talk to me about how that all unfolded.
Right. I guess I don't know if I thought about what other people did. I did not think about writing on harp though, because I didn't really know of many songwriters that were harpists, or I didn't know of any actually. And I started off writing on piano, and I thought, that's what you do. You play piano in a band. But then my friend's dad showed me Joanna Newsom, gave me a tape recording of her sitting in on a radio station somewhere. And when I discovered Joanna Newsom, I thought, oh, cool, she can do it, I can do it. So, and then I discovered, Alice Coltrane and other harpists that were a little more unconventional. So I started writing for harp and voice in high school. And yeah, I guess at that point I knew what I was doing was a bit more unusual.
So, with this immersion in the classical literature, but also in sort of this futuristic folk music of Joanna Newsom and jazz harp, were you already kind of thinking about these divergent paths when you went off to college? I mean, obviously, when you go in that funnel of school, there's a certain curriculum that you're going to go into, but you must have already had a wider imagination, even as you entered as a freshman.
Yeah, I mean, even when I was going to school as a freshman, I still had that mindset of getting my performance degree, my undergraduate degree, and then going on and getting my master's degree and possibly my doctorate degree, because I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to teach harp at a college originally, or maybe be in an orchestra, and I wanted to do all those harp competitions, go to Israel and all that. But my sophomore year of college, a booking agency reached out to me and wanted to sign me. This was Paradigm. It's a pretty huge agency, and I'm not with them anymore. But when I signed with Paradigm, I decided, okay, maybe I can do this and I can be a touring songwriter and do this path that I thought would be extremely difficult to succeed at. But I think either way, when you're being a musician, it's difficult to succeed. I mean, as a harpist, if you want to land a job in an orchestra, there's only two harpists
If
in
you're
every
lucky.
yeah, if you're lucky. And if you get second harp, I mean, maybe you're on one concert a year, because
Mhm.
there's not very many pieces with two harp parts.
I'm really curious about this. How did the booking agent find you? What had you released out in the world that somebody would have heard your music?
She found me through the Rochester Lilac Festival, actually, because I had played the festival that summer, and one of her clients also played the Lilac Festival. And she was a young agent who was still an assistant, and her boss told her she could sign her first act. And so I was her first act. Now she books Billie Eilish.
That's
So
amazing.
she really evolved and grew. She hooked me up on some cool tours and helped me through a lot of my formative years of being a touring artist.
Just out of curiosity, did she discover, like, quote unquote, discover Billie Eilish as well?
Yes. She did.
That's amazing.
I remember when she signed Billie Eilish, and I looked at Billie's page, and she had 4,000 followers, and her Instagram name was like, "Where are the avocados?" And I remember checking her out when Sarah Bullwinkle is her name, when she told me about this new artist. And yeah, I checked her out, and she showed me Ocean Eyes. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And it was that Ocean Eyes was like on SoundCloud, and then all of a sudden she blew up overnight. And I was in disbelief, like, holy crap, this is insane. So obviously Sarah is basically only working with Billie now, I think. So we parted ways a few years ago, and I signed with an agency very recently called 33 and West, and they're great. Although we haven't been able to book anything because of the pandemic, but...
So I'm curious, going back to when you've got the attention of a booking agent, and that kind of leapfrogs in some ways some of the, the self-management that an artist like you might have gone through had they not got that attention. I'm wondering, when you were in college, though, was there some tension between coursework, playing an orchestra, and getting time off for the shows and stuff that they were booking for you?
Yeah, it was extremely stressful. And my teacher, thank goodness, she was always super, super supportive of me being in a band. And I don't think that would have been the case if I went to a conservatory. I think my teacher would have, tried to snap me right out of it. Although I think she was a little disappointed that I didn't go on to grad school and do any competitions, but she knew that I really wanted to tour as a band. So she let me, for my senior recital, play more contemporary pieces, and just kind of pick and choose what I wanted to play. But it was pretty intense my junior and senior year. When I was off from school, I was touring. And then on top of that, I had to be prepping repertoire for juries and recitals. And it was a lot of work, but I'm really happy that I stuck it out and finished my degree. And I guess I could technically go to grad school if I wanted to at any point. But I'm happy I have my performance degree.
Of course. When I entered conservatory, I also had the idea that I would go on and get a master's and terminal degree and go on to teaching. And if I'm being completely candid, Mikaela, I thought that because I didn't really know what else to do. Right. There aren't that many channels for us to go through. Is that kind of why you had that idea, or was there a little bit more substance to it than I had?
Totally. That is why I wanted to get my doctorate, because I thought, if I'm going to be a harpist, it's going to be tough for me to get a job at an orchestra. I know that. So if I continue on and just go to school for as long as I possibly can, then I probably have a better shot at landing a job as a professor, whether it's adjunct or whatnot, at a school. Because, I thought that's kind of the best or only option for me.
When you went out on the road in those early days, what were the kinds of things that you learned? I would imagine that there's a big gap from going from playing a festival here or some local shows to playing a string of concerts in a different town every night. Talk to me about what kind of education, kind of like maybe a finishing school in a way, that giving a lot of performances on the road was like.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is, above all else, I have to make sure I'm taking care of myself and my body and my voice. Because when you're on the road, it's easy to stay up late and hang out, and you're driving all day and then playing the show, and you're kind of in survival mode. And once you have a minute to rest, I always get sick after a tour, and sometimes I get sick during the tour. So I think the most important thing is to just make sure you're taking care of yourself and making sure you're keeping yourself grounded and drinking lots of water and tea. I know that sounds kind of silly, but that's really the biggest lesson I've learned. And I guess another one is I have to make sure I'm playing a lot before I go on tour, and louder, because when I'm practicing by myself, I don't play it as hard on the strings of the harp. And once I'm going out on tour with the band, I always get some at least a couple blood blisters, immediately after the first couple shows.
Is that just because of the energy of the live performance?
Yeah, I think it's partly because when I'm playing with the band and we all have our amplifiers going, I'm just digging into the strings harder. So even if I'm playing consistently before a tour by myself, I always still get blisters when I go out on tour with the band.
Do you think of the shows as being, because with a classical background, we're, as you know, there's a high premium on perfection in classical music, to probably to its detriment, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering, with the way you treat the touring shows, do you think of them as a product that you more or less deliver each night with a similar quality, or is each one a kind of a spontaneous affair?
That is something I had to unlearn after college is playing everything perfectly and making sure you know exactly what you're going to play. It's definitely more spontaneous for us. We never play the same set. Yeah, we never play the same set twice in a row.
Hmm.
And even though we're playing a lot of the same songs, there's more improvisation, which is something that I did not do much as a classical musician, which I think every classical musician should be improvising. Um, I think it would help a lot.
Agreed. Now, talk to me about what specifically or generally, what do you think would help, if classical players dedicated some percentage of their practice to improvisation? How would that make them improve, do you think?
I mean, I think it would improve a lot overall. It would improve the way you look at practicing, the way you play in an ensemble with others and playing in an orchestra. And, people are so afraid of playing perfectly or else they could be fired,
Hmm.
right? So it might honestly relieve some stresses about that, which might make you play better in the long run. And just when you're sight reading, I mean, I think it would help with sight reading too. I'm a terrible sight reader, and I am just starting to learn how to play jazz now. I do improvise, but
Hmm.
I don't really know what I'm doing. I suppose. But I'm just starting to learn about rootless voicing, which Bill Evans, a great jazz pianist. It's kind of his thing, his style, and it's just like you're emitting the bass note, and then you're playing the chords differently in different inversions, and then you're improvising over that in your right hand. And I'm working on the song "Tune Up" by Miles Davis, which is originally for just being an exercise, and it's extremely hard because it's changing key all the time, and as a harpist I have to change the pedals a lot more when I'm playing jazz.
Sure,
So
yeah, I would imagine.
it's difficult, but it's super rewarding, and I feel like after just toying around with that for only a week I already feel like I'm better at my instrument and just more well-rounded.
It's interesting you say that, because I had Herb Smith on here a little while ago, the trumpet player from the RPO, who's obviously has a great background in jazz, and he talked about how he can bring more technique to the instrument, not being a strictly classical player. So you're saying you're bringing this into your practice. Are you seeing it? So you're seeing it pay dividends through theory and through your ear hand connection, but are you seeing like a growing technique as well?
Definitely. And I think it makes you rethink how you hear a chord or how you hear a piece even. And it probably changes the way you play altogether. So I think he's totally right about that.
Talk to me a little bit about, you say you're talking about we on tour. So talk to me about putting together a band and taking that out on the road, and what are the challenges and joys of that?
So I love playing in a band. It's definitely less stressful than playing in an ensemble where everything is so particular, and you're reading the music and you have to play exactly what's on the music. And of course people have different interpretations of different pieces, don't get me wrong, but I remember being in college and being so nervous before a performance, or like when I was playing a concerto with the orchestra in college. It's, you're so scared that you're going to mess up or play the wrong thing or forget a certain section. But when I'm with my band, I always feel at ease, and we're working together as a team, and there's no wrong notes. You can change up a song anytime. Say like, hey, on this song, like let's play this a little differently today. Let's try something new. And if you mess up, no one's gonna care or critique you badly or say you like, I know this piece and you played it wrong.
I'm curious though, as a performer then, are there two worlds in the sense that nerves and stress are a part of being a classical musician, but when you took it to the Mikaela Davis band, you shed that completely? Or is it like, do you have 20% of nerves before you take the stage each night?
I'll still get nerves sometimes, of course, maybe more so if we're playing a brand new song, or I mostly get nerves when I'm about to sit in with another artist or a different band, because I want to play well enough for them and I want to play their song right. And I think that's where a lot of the stress came from with playing pieces written by other people, because you want to do them justice and you want to, make your teacher proud and make the orchestra sound good. But when I'm playing a piece I wrote, I feel much more comfortable messing it up or playing something different, because, oh, whatever, it's my piece. I'm not going to get too mad at myself or be too hard on myself.
Talk to me about being, well, for lack of a better word, a band leader, because it is your band. And so you've obviously put together this incredible group and you guys play beautifully together. But I'm curious about, is it a purely collaborative relationship, or do you see yourself almost like a small business owner and you have to kind of keep everybody on the straight and narrow to a certain degree?
Well, it's kind of both, because I am technically a small business owner and my bandmates are technically my employees. I pay them a certain amount every show, and I pay them per diems when we're on tour for food and whatnot. But it is very collaborative, and I consider everybody a very important piece to the puzzle of the band. I'm the owner of the business so that they can get paid. I'm not going to make everyone sign on to owning the business and then no one makes money, and then how long are you going to tour after that? But it doesn't feel like a transactional relationship at all to me. It's my best friends. It's my bandmates. I mean, my drummer, Alex Cote, we've been friends since forever, since grade school. And he started playing with me when I first started playing out at bars when I was 18. So we've been playing in a band together for about 11 years. And Cian McCarthy and Shane McCarthy. Cian plays guitar, Shane plays bass. Cian's been playing with us for about 8 years. Shane's been playing with us for 6-ish.
And where did you meet those guys?
Through Alex. So Alex and Cian went to SUNY Purchase for jazz, and later Cian switched to classical composition. So Alex met Cian there and brought him into the band. So I actually met Cian for the first time at band practice. And then Shane is Cian's younger brother, so we didn't have a bass player in the band, and eventually started playing bigger venues and needed a bass player. So Shane hopped on, started playing with us when he was, I think, 14. And I made him graduate from high school early so he could go on tour with us. And then Kurt Johnson plays with us as well. He joined the band. He played with us off and on when he could, but he's more so a permanent member as of the last couple of years. And he plays lap steel and pedal steel and guitar, multi-instrumentalist, really incredible musician. Yeah, being a band leader is interesting because when we're having band practice, I don't feel like I have to be in control and like planning out every moment of every practice like a conductor would do in an orchestra. And it's actually hard for me to do that, maybe because I've always been, part of the orchestra, part of the ensemble, where you're not really in charge of everything. I'm so used to just doing what I'm told and playing things a certain way because, you're going to your lessons and your teacher is telling you how to play something. So now that I'm like the quote unquote boss, it's hard for me to navigate that, I guess.
Yeah, because you're not in the orchestra business. We're auditioning for the best technical player, supposedly, right? That's the conceit. You're hiring, so to speak, for the best person for the job, the best person for that group. And you kind of probably want to help them be themselves more than you're trying to lead them anywhere.
Yeah, honestly, the most important thing about having a successful band is getting along. Seriously,
Hmm.
because when you're on tour, you are with these people 24/7 for a month straight or longer. So the most important thing is to get along and vibe off of each other. So I feel incredibly lucky because my bandmates and I get along really well. We are all the best of friends, and they also all happen to be amazing musicians. So I really couldn't ask for more. I feel super lucky.
In classical chamber music, there's often a lot of rules around rehearsals, like agreed upon rules. Do you guys have to, because you're such great friends, I would imagine that rehearsals could kind of spin out of control, or just go on and on and on. Do you put any constraints on yourself to make sure that you stay somewhat disciplined and efficient?
We try to, yeah, usually before rehearsals, we'll map out what songs we have to go over and we'll kind of decide on what the set list is going to be or how many songs we need to have together before a tour. But, it's easy to just get into snack time mode and,
Mhm.
go in the kitchen and all of a sudden an hour's passed and it's like, oh shoot, we got to get back to rehearsing. We still haven't gone over like half the songs we need to get through, but also playing with the same people and playing a lot of the same songs is nice because sometimes we can just skip something like, oh, we know this song really well, we don't have to go over that today.
Sure.
And sometimes we take a song and we're like, hey, we're sick of the way we used to play this song, let's do something completely different, let's do it acoustic, or hey Alex, why don't you try brushes on the drums this time, or hey, let's switch up this section and change the bass line, or maybe I'll play harp less, or there's endless opportunities. So it keeps it really fresh and interesting.
After you graduated from college, is that when you moved down to New York City?
Yes, correct.
Did you take the whole band with you down there?
No, after I graduated, I moved down there with my boyfriend at the time, and it was four of us in a two-bedroom, and so we were sharing rooms, and it was still expensive. I mean, I was still paying 600 a month, and after a year, I moved back to Rochester because it was pretty unattainable just trying to play shows and pay for rent and food.
Sure. Tell me though what you hoped to achieve by moving down to New York City. What was the ambition, the impetus behind that move?
I think I was pretty young and I just thought that's what you do. You want to be a musician, you move to New York City and then you make it. And that's just what happens. But I mean, I love New York City. I really love it there. But you're a small fish in a
Hmm.
pretty big freaking pond, and it's hard to break through in such a humongous music scene like that.
But I'm curious, you had a booking agent at that point. Your
Mhm.
career was going in the right direction. So what was if the pie in the sky had worked out with New York City, what would have been a really fruitful outcome for you?
I don't know. I mean, I look back at living in New York City and I don't think I would live there again unless I had a lot of money. I
Hmm.
think as a touring musician, it doesn't really matter where you
Hmm.
live as long as you have access to your band and can play at some good venues and just have a good core of people on your side. And after I moved back to Rochester, I was really glad I did because my band was there. And I don't really know what my end goal was for New York City. I guess I just wanted to meet more people and be more connected.
Did
And
any of that happen?
totally, yeah, I've met some really great friends in New York.
So talk to me about there's obviously a much more space and much more attainable pace of life here in Rochester. Talk to me about making music and being based as an international touring artist, but having your home base in a small and pretty tight knit arts community.
Yeah, I always prided myself on living in Rochester because I grew up in Rochester and I love Rochester. I think it's cool. I think there's an incredible music scene. I think there's some really cool people there and a lot of good stuff going on. And because it was cheap, I can tour anywhere, but living in Rochester, it was just affordable. And I just thought, oh, it doesn't really matter where you live. Of course, I recently moved to the Hudson Valley area because I felt like living in Western New York was just a little far, a little too far
It's
from all the things I wanted to do all the time.
it's a little bit like being on an island up here.
Yeah, it is. And I think I never really noticed that because I grew up in Rochester and I'm used to driving 6 hours to go to New York City or 4 hours to get to Woodstock or whatnot. But I realized that the Hudson Valley is so much more central to a lot of big cities, and there's more music venues down here. There's way more musicians to connect with. I have a lot of friends in the area. I think a lot of it was the venue. I didn't really feel like there was like the perfect venue for us in Rochester. And I mean, I got my start at the Bug Jar, which is a small dive bar, and I love the Bug Jar. But I mean, it's either the Bug Jar or Abilene, which is another venue I absolutely love, another small bar. And it's either the small bar or like Anthology, which is like 1,000 cap venue. And there just wasn't anything in between that felt like the perfect venue for us. But down here in the Hudson Valley, there's so many venues that I absolutely love. And we've been playing at Levon Helm's Barn. There's the Colony in Woodstock, and just so many options. And then New York City and Philly and Boston. I mean, they're all within reach, like a day trip away.
It's funny. I moved to Rochester from Louisville, Kentucky was the last place I lived.
Right.
And so obviously a really fertile native music scene there and pretty dispersed too, a lot of experimental music, a lot of jazz. And coming to Rochester is actually like a classical music center, right? There's these two major institutions here. So and yet, as you described, the rest of the music scene actually is a little dispersed, I guess, and kind of hard to put your finger on. So I can understand what you're saying. So obviously Levon Helm Studios is near where you are. It's in Woodstock, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So what kind of music, is there any one particular kind of music that seems to settle in the Hudson Valley, or is it everybody in all kinds?
I think it's all kinds of music. I mean, there's a lot of lovers of the band and Neil Young and Bob Dylan, and a lot of folk music, and a lot of country and Americana. But I think there's a little bit of everything down here, and that's what's so cool. And there's so many little small towns with different communities of musicians, and they're all super fruitful, and everyone supports each other, much like Rochester. Everyone kind of supports each other in Rochester. But I wanted a change, and I'm really loving it down here.
That's great. Do you think that small towns will become more of a part of artistic communities? In other words, lots of people are leaving some of the big cities. We hear about it all the time. An exodus from Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and people sometimes moving to other big cities, just like a Denver or Phoenix or whatever, but also people finding something more akin to what you're talking about. Do you think that's going to be more of a trend for performing artists after COVID?
Absolutely. I mean, it's already a trend. There's so many people who've moved to the Hudson Valley from New York City. And we kind of chose a bad time to move down here because everyone is moving here and finding housing is nearly impossible and it's pretty expensive. And I think it's only a matter of time until Rochester explodes with with more musicians
Hmm.
and a bigger scene.
Yeah, because the up here there's a lot of capacity. There's a lot of unused housing. There's
Mhm.
traffic isn't really a thing here in any meaningful way. I read this is a little off topic, but I read the other day that there's only like 350,000 single family houses for sale right now in the entire United States. Like, yeah.
Oh,
So there is a real bottleneck in real estate. And so
wow.
because people are moving and the market hasn't, I guess the market just hasn't adjusted to the demand.
Yeah, everyone's trying to get out of the city to have their home in the country so they can be safe.
I think people of all walks of life, Mikaela, are reflecting and on their working. And I'm wondering, as we listen to, the like business folks that are probably going to take fewer business travels in the future, and like the workers in Manhattan that would have an hour commute each way from Long Island or whatever, that are not going to do that anymore, even after a vaccine. How do you think this might play out downstream for recording artists and touring artists? In other words, do you see that you might play fewer live shows going forward and maybe boost your online presence, and maybe I'm making up a number, but 10 or 20% of your live output, maybe not being on the road?
I think, honestly, once the pandemic subsides, I think that small artists, smaller acts will really shine in live shows. And I think I'll honestly be touring more than
Mm.
I was before because people are going to be so hungry for live music. And I think now during the pandemic is a good time to be taking advantage of live streaming and buying more gear. I think after the pandemic will be a really great time for smaller artists because it'll be a while before big shows can happen again. And I think first the smaller shows will be able to happen. So the smaller acts will be touring and people are just going to come out to whatever show is. Yeah, they're going to
Mhm.
come out to whatever show it is. They're going to want to see whatever the live music is. I think it will be really good for us.
You make an interesting point, because obviously there's going to be what I think of as almost like a honeymoon period after it's reasonably safe for like 6 months or so. People are going to go to every restaurant they miss. They're going to go to every show they can. They're going to go to every gallery exhibit. Um, Talk to me about, though, how you have spent these last, whatever it's been, 8 or 9 months that we've been going through this nightmare.
I have been playing a lot of music during the pandemic. I thankfully I live with two of my bandmates. I live with Kian and Shane. So we started off doing a lot of live streams and we kind of got burnt out on that because I felt like we were playing the same thing over and over
Mhm.
again. But since then we've acquired a lot of recording gear and we've been writing and recording. I've written more songs this year than I have in the past 5 years, probably combined, which is really exciting for me because I'm a pretty slow songwriter.
Mhm.
And I think I'm kind of developing my craft a little more, a little better. And I think that DIY is definitely coming back and recording yourself. Labels don't have money anymore and people have to kind of figure out what to do now that there's no more money in the
Mhm.
music industry. So, recording yourself, doing more session work. I've been trying to pick up more session work. So, hey, please hire me, anyone. And I can I can write, record, and perform all myself. So I think it's really important for all musicians to learn how to record themselves right now. I mean, especially classical musicians, because people always want strings and horns on the record. And if you have a microphone and have just an interface and have Logic or whatever you want to use, you are much more likely to be hired than someone who's like, oh yeah, I can do this if you pay for the studio.
Mm-hmm.
So pro tip, everyone should have a home studio.
It's interesting you say that. A guest I had on before, Jessica Goderi, she's a phenomenal violinist that we used to be in the same orchestra a decade or more ago. And she's since moved to Los Angeles and is a staple of the studio scene there. And so that's a pretty structured scene, that they hire the same people because, you have to be super dependable. You have to be able to play your ass off. And they've moved a lot of that stuff online or like moved to home studios, just as you said. So they're like tracking like Netflix shows or video games or movie tracks. So people are recording their individual parts in their apartment and they don't have to go out and fight the LA traffic. I actually want to hear a little bit more about your studio work. I didn't know that was something that you did, so you're a session musician. So you're playing on other songwriters' tracks and other bands and things like that.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a little while, but I'm trying to play. I'm trying to do more session work just because it's the only way I can really make money right now. I've played on like a Joywave local band from Rochester. I wrote an interlude for their album, one of their albums, like 4 or 5 years ago, and I really enjoy going into a session and the songwriter just kind of giving me their song and letting me do my thing, do whatever. I really enjoy coming with parts. And I don't know if you've heard of Joanna Wong. She's like a Taiwanese American songwriter. She's really incredible. But I recorded Harp for a couple of her tracks on her newest album, Love is Calling Me, a few years ago. And I guess it's really helped me to be in the touring world and to know different artists, because that's how it now, if somebody wants Harp on their album, people might think of me to do it because I've been touring and have met a lot of different people. So like with Joanna Wong's album, I got lucky because Chris Funk from the Decemberists was producing it, and he had heard of me through my old manager or something. So he reached out to me to record Harp on that. I absolutely love playing on people's albums. I love doing session work.
So as you become a little bit more technically proficient with the recording apparatus, if you become like pretty adept at recording, you lower one barrier to entry of like one of the hurdles of making a record. And I wonder, will you be releasing more music, do you think, because you've got maybe getting out of the way of having to book studio time every time you want to make a record?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have not released anything in 2 years. But on New Year's Day, my band released a Elliott Smith cover on his old label, Kill Rock Stars, with our friend Mary Lou Lord, who's a staple in the folk scene. But the only reason why we were able to put all this together was, Mary Lou had this idea that we record the song with her, and thankfully we had the tools to record it ourselves. So we, sent the track to Alex. He recorded drums, and then he sent it to us, and we recorded the harp and the vocals and the guitar and bass. And Mary Lou sent us her tracks. We all recorded our parts separately from home, and Kurt recorded his own part. And that wouldn't have been possible if none of us had the equipment to do it. So now we have a new song out, and we also wrote a song a couple months ago and did the same sort of thing where we all recorded our parts separately from our homes. And that song's not out yet. Hopefully we'll put it out in the next couple months. But it's really important for people to have a plan B right now, especially when you can't go into a studio because of COVID.
I ask that question partly because I've heard that the algorithms for Spotify in particular really reward artists who can put out a lot of music. So you mentioned that you were, you're sitting on a whole bunch of new material that you've created during the quarantine. I'm wondering, has it disrupted your output? I mean, would you have normally put out a record now if this hadn't happened?
Possibly. I mean, there's been a lot of curveballs thrown at me this past year. I was with Rounder, and I had a 3 record deal with them. They had confirmed they wanted to do the second record with me. And then the pandemic happened, and I think they didn't have the funds to help me, and basically told me that they wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to make the record in 2021 this year, which was originally what we were planning on. I was going to make the record this year. So I basically asked them if I could leave because I didn't want to be held in this contract anymore and have to wait and wait and wait.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're signed to a label, I mean, they basically own you and you can't release music without their approval. And, I put out an album in 2018, but Rounder owns the masters. So I don't own the masters to those songs. So I feel pretty excited to not have a label right now. And we're going to record the next album ourselves, hopefully in the next couple months. And I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to partner with a label or just try to put it out ourselves and hire a publicity team. But I think it's kind of a whole new world out there right now. Things are changing really fast, for better or for worse. I don't know yet.
I've heard other musicians in a similar situation as you talk about, obviously taking on that risk yourself, that financial risk up front is really jaw-dropping, eye-popping, whatever, but that it is quite a liberating thing on the other side to be in total control of your intellectual property.
Yeah, it was really fun to sign with a label, and they paid for the album and paid my band, and I got some money to live off of, and that was a really great experience, and I think I learned a lot from it. But I also just went with the flow and kind of just trusted what they wanted me to do and went with it. And I think now I've learned that I should always just go with my gut. And now, I'm in control of everything, and my band is in control, and it's really empowering. And even if I have to pay for everything myself, I think we're going to have a lot of fun doing it, and the next record will feel more honest and feel more like really how my band sounds.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with streaming services in general. I mean, I would imagine for someone in your position, it's quite a trade-off in that, that it's an easy way to have people find you and to hear you. But the flip side, of course, is that the fees are quite low. Do the benefits outweigh the cons of that situation?
No. Streaming services really suck, honestly, but I have all my music on Spotify and whatnot just so it'll be heard more. Yeah, as much as I hate to say it, but yeah, for the exposure, I guess. And my label gets all the money from Spotify, from the last album, because my deal with them was, okay, they make money from Spotify until I hit a certain threshold. And I'm not going to hit that threshold, so they're going to be collecting money probably forever from that.
Sorry to interrupt, Mikaela, but I do want to know this. So you say you're never going to hit that threshold. I mean, is that hyperbole, or is it just not going to be for a while?
Right. I guess I could hit that threshold, but I really don't see it happening.
Okay.
Unless, a song maybe got on a big movie and then had like 100 million plays or something crazy. But Spotify is pretty awful, and they give you pretty much next to nothing. And I think the only way we could really change it is if the bigger artists bind together and boycott Spotify. Like if all the really big artists say like, hey, no way, we're not going to do this, and they boycott and take all their songs off, then it'll be easier for the smaller artists to do the same thing. But, if I were to boycott Spotify and take my music off, it would honestly just hurt me more than it would help me. So, yeah, it's tough.
Well, I mean, it's really an exciting proposition, though, as you transition into this new era in your career, obviously creatively, it seems like. And we're all entering into a performing arts marketplace that we don't really, really know what's going to happen. But I would imagine going into it with more creative control and a lot of fire in the belly to make it happen is actually probably a fairly optimistic place to be. Mikaela, I think this is a pretty good place to wrap up. Do you have any recommendations on things that people should check out? Books, music, film, anything?
For sure. Music wise, I would say everyone should go check out Joanna Sternberg. They have an album out called Then I Try Some More. And I really love their music because it's just so honest and so from the heart. And they remind me of like Karen Dalton mixed with maybe Neil Young and Elliott Smith. And it just sounds like a classic old folk record. If anyone wants to check that out, Joanna Sternberg. And also, my friend Mary Lou turned me on to this old folk artist. Her name is Connie Converse, and she was in the scene in New York City in the 50s, around the same time as Bob Dylan, or even before Bob Dylan. But she couldn't get a record deal, no matter what she did, and her music was kind of lost in the mix of things. And she ended up like driving off a cliff in 1974 because she was so burned out. I know it's kind of depressing, but her music was discovered years later because somebody had recorded her show at a house one time, or there were some lost studio recordings, this and that. But I was just checking her out, and it's really some cool stuff. And I think maybe Vashti Bunyan was probably influenced by Connie Converse, if you've ever heard of Vashti Bunyan, another classic like folk artist. And of course, I gotta give it up to Dorothy Ashby and Alice Coltrane, harpists I'd admire and love. But besides music, have you ever seen the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
I have, and I remember the soundtrack being pretty amazing. It's been a while though.
Yeah, that's my favorite movie of all time, and John Bryan scored the movie, and I love his music, John Bryan. And then Michel Gondry is the person who directed it, and in the movie it's all these like trick of the eye things going on where like something looks smaller and bigger, and it's really great movie. If anyone hasn't seen it, you should check it out for sure.
Well, thanks for those, Mikaela. I'm excited to check out the first few that I don't know. So thank you very much for making time. It was great talking with you.
Yep, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. The music on the show, as always, is by the great guitar virtuoso and my guest on episode number 20, Craig Wagner from Louisville, Kentucky. My next guest will be Meredith Snow, a violist in the Los Angeles Philharmonic and chair of ICSOM, the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians. So please go ahead and hit subscribe.